Sorry to rush in at the very last minute. I've just come from first year.
That's all right. We've still got people popping in, so give it another minute or two.
Give me a couple of seconds to organise myself because I realised I just brought up my first year notes rather than the...
Oh, okay. Oh, well, we'll give you a minute to make sure you've got all of the right things in front of you.
I can talk about male contraception if you like.
Could be interesting, but not the purpose of this event. Just while everyone is popping in, just a couple of other events that we've got coming up soon through Monash Central. There's an ECR panel discussion on leadership and management skills. That's next Tuesday from 10 till 11:15. So have a look and register for that one if you're interested. We also have the virtual social mixer that we're holding for Faculty of Science ECRs tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. So that's really just a little bit of fun, not work-related talk or anything, just a bit of a social event since we can't all get together and, you know, have a barbecue or anything like we usually would. Also, our next sort of professional development related ECR event is coming up on the 20th of October. So I'll send some information about that in the coming weeks. That's on the business of science with Fiona Broussard from Business Development. So that should be quite an interesting session as well that I would encourage everyone to attend. I think we've sort of stabilized the number of people who are popping in, and it's a couple of minutes past 3 o'clock. So as always, welcome to this session on, I guess, our COVID communications, I've been calling them, with Professor Craig White, our Associate Dean of Research, to update us on all of the matters that are happening in the university during this time. So thanks again, Craig, for taking the time out to run these sessions for us. I'm always getting feedback that they're very useful to have that communication coming through. As always, if everyone could just please make sure that their cameras and audio are turned off. And thank you to everyone who did send in questions in advance. We did have a few come through this time, which was really great to see. If you do have questions throughout, please send them in using the chat function, and I'll read them out at the end. You're also welcome to send them to me privately if you'd like to remain anonymous as well, that's fine. And as always, the session is being recorded and will be made available afterwards on the Orbit page and also on the workplace group. So I think that's everything from me. So thanks again, Craig, and I will hand over to you.
Cool. Thank you. So we do have quite a long list today relative to other weeks. I'm going to address all of the questions. There are going to be some that I can't answer, partly because, a little bit because I don't know the answers, but some because there are not yet any answers. And I'll try and point out sort of where that is, and where I can, I'll try and point out why the uncertainty exists. But there are just some things that I'm not sure about. So I'll start with sort of the bigger ones, and then there's some ones that are worth dealing with in a bit more detail towards the end. So the first question was, what might the smaller Monash look and feel like in 2021? And what implications does this have for ECRs? So you will have seen that the Vice-Chancellor sent out an email which provided information about the rollout of voluntary separation packages and what categories of staff are in scope and out of scope. And that gives us a little bit of an indication about, if you run through that entire list, it gives us a bit of an indication about how the shape of the university might be a little bit different. So there's going to be likely an increased centralisation of some roles. So there are roles around student services and things like that. It's quite a lot. There's a number of FTE in that area. That doesn't impact the Faculty of Science particularly much in terms of numbers, but the university processes, I think, will shift as a whole. So there'll be an increased centralisation of some services. Probably more in other faculties will be affected than us. You'll see that there are 3 schools in which there are voluntary positions within the Faculty of Science, or 3 of the Clayton-based schools. That's not because those schools have been singled out, that's because of other things that have happened during this period that necessitate that. So it's not that particular schools are being singled out as underperformers or areas that we're trying to step back from. There are some other circumstances which are around individual staff members that I therefore can't talk about that have led to the FTE reductions taking place in, or the VSPs being sought in particular areas rather than others. So it is being borne everywhere. It's just being borne through the VSPs in one way through some of the schools. So there'll be that impact. The implications for ECRs are at this stage a little bit difficult to predict, as they are for everyone. So I have I'm starting to get more insight. As some of you will know, I'm transitioning into the role of head of School of Biological Sciences. So I'm starting to see how the schools are receiving information and what information is available more than I did as ADR, because my viewpoint is shifting. Well, actually my viewpoint's taking in two things currently. And there is still some genuine uncertainty about what the sort of budgetary situation will be and how that's going to influence what we do in the coming year. And that's, I think, in large part, from what I can see in my roles, that's in large part because a lot of the effort has gone into this VSP process that's just gone out to consultation in the last little while. So the effort has been getting that working as best it can. And so the budget is, I guess, the next thing that's being looked at. The planning is beginning to take place, but it's planning that does not yet have an outcome. So we've seen the way that the government is handling travel and things like that, and that will impact the number of students who will be able to get into the country from overseas. And so I think anything that we can do is sort of crystal ball gazing based on that sort of information. So we know that there's not going to be huge numbers of overseas students coming into Australia in the first semester next year. So that suggests to me that we don't anticipate, that a big 370 million or whatever it is going to reappear in the books in the university. What will change is that there'll be savings in a bunch of areas, including in the 270 so FTE that will be moving on before the end of the year, or taking voluntary packages before the end of the year. So that will provide a little bit more option. Also, we will know about 2021 with more time than we knew about 2020. All of the impact in 2020 happened very quickly. And so decisions were made in a very rapidly changing area. So at least we will be planning for 2021 in advance. So that allows us to make some difficult but more forethought type choices as we go into it. So I think I would expect that we're going to see a little bit more centralisation. We are definitely going to have to be smaller. We know that because hundreds of people are being lost from the university. And we know that there are some contracts not being renewed. We know that there has been a decrease in the use of casual staff across the university, so it will be smaller. But in the Faculty of Science, we are still enrolling Bachelor of Science students. People are still coming to university, so that teaching will carry on. We've shifted online in the last year, so we're able to do that now, but we don't know what first semester next year is going to look like. We don't know if we'll be, I do so sincerely hope we are not in the third wave and that we will have students on campus and we will go back to being a university in the way that we were before, but it's really hard to know. So that's a very long-winded, largely non-answer, except to say I think we'll be smaller, our BSc students will be back, the budgetary impacts are still being worked out. But no one wants to be getting rid of huge amounts of people, no one wants to stop teaching BSc, no one wants to stop doing research. It's really just optimizing within a difficult set of constraints and a continually changing one of the, I would say that, and I think this sentiment would be echoed by a lot of the leadership team, that this has been probably the hardest 6 months of my working life, trying to work out how to deal with this constant changing situation. And hopefully 2021 will be more stable. So at least if we're making, well, we will be making difficult choices, I'm sure, but hopefully we'll have more stability and more ability to plan into the future than we currently do. So the advice that I have for handling the increased workload that comes from a shrinking workforce is going to depend on exactly how that workload is deployed. We've seen some of the consequences of deployment in that across the schools, postdocs have been asked to take on extra marking responsibilities. I know the numbers that some people have had to take on are pretty substantial. I don't know what the capacity to continue doing that. I would not like to see people, research-only folk, interrupting their research careers too substantially in a really uncertain environment. I guess things like that in terms of how the workload will be distributed, what we can do differently potentially in 2021 is that if we know what the budget is going to be in advance of the year, we can make changes to the way that we deliver content, we can make changes to the way that we assess students that can reduce that. The problem we had this year is that we set everything up to be a normal year and then it wasn't. Next year we can set it up for whatever the situation we have. So hopefully the workload will not be as high next year, but there will be a smaller number of people around, but in the Faculty of Science, the reduction is not that huge. And you can see the exact, I don't want to state the numbers based on my memory of them, but there's a link to a PDF through the Vice Chancellor's email that does have the exact numbers in it. So you can look and see what the impact will be. So handling the increased workload is, for me, it's about accepting that things are different. I've had to adjust my own expectations of what I wanted to achieve in 2020, the things that I wanted to get done. And I think it's adjusting I think a big part of it is adjusting our expectations for what we are able to get done. And ability to do that is going to depend on your position. In my position, I have a continuing job, and so I can adjust my expectations in one way. People who are working on a different timeline have different constraints. And so then it's about choosing your best, the best place to deploy the time that you have around that workload. And I've just come from a session which was, so earlier today, it was an academic heads network meeting about supporting staff through achievement relative to opportunity discussions going into probation, promotion, those kind of things. So all of the different leadership positions. So this was a group of heads of schools and associate deans who were making sure that everyone understood how to do that. So hopefully your managers will be reasonably well placed to help you have those discussions. Okay. And yeah, do keep sending questions through via Margaret if I haven't addressed anything that you were hoping that I would with these questions, and I'll circle back around for sure. So where in the faculty is going to be impacted by the voluntary redundancies, I think it's best that I point you in the direction of the Vice-Chancellor's email, which will provide links through to the specific areas and detail what is in scope and what is not. I guess the only caveat I will say is that what is in scope, the number of FTE that fall within scope vastly exceeds the number of VSPs that will be available. So the in scope is broad because it is role defined. So it's things like if it's a particular type of support service that falls in scope, everyone who has that name of that support service in their job title is then within scope. It doesn't mean that they'll be targeted or pushed out. These are all voluntary packages, but it does mean that the number of people who are in scope is very big because they're broad categories. But the Vice Chancellor, that PDF actually is pretty detailed in terms of what it breaks it down to. So the impact so what impact will the university's budget have on teaching and research next year and into the future? So this is the problem that's being addressed at the moment. We don't quite know exactly what the number that we're working towards is, but I know that all of the schools are gathering up information on what needs to be done, what funding success is likely to be like, what roles would like to be renewed, so that we understand what the requirements are. And I know that Dean has been working very hard at the senior levels to ensure that research is able to carry on in a way that is less constrained than this year. So he's been bashing on doors whenever he gets the opportunity to push that. Teaching is an area that's a little bit challenging. So what we have at the moment is we fundamentally have the university has a fall in teaching income, and that constrains the money that can be delivered to teaching. The problem that we have in the Faculty of Science is that our BSc students are still turning up. That's not a problem. That is a great problem. It is good that the students keep coming because that's what universities do. But it does mean that with less teaching income coming in across the university, but us having very broadly similar numbers of students, that provides a challenge. The other challenge is going to be what sorts of social distancing and other constraints we have on spaces. So I've just come from my first year teaching, and that course is well over 1,000 students. There are big courses in chemistry and other places, and packing them into rooms like we did previously in the Learning and Teaching building, where I'd sit in a room with 200 people, depending on the social distancing, is going to be harder. So I think what we're going to need to do is plan, once we understand the nature of the problem, we're going to need to plan carefully how we're going to deliver our teaching so that we're able to make sure the students get the education that they've come for, but also that we can do it in a way that we're not, for want of a better phrase, in a way that we're not destroying our workforce, and the way that we are able to do it safely, consistent with whatever the COVID-19 situation will be come early 2021 and beyond. So it's basically being planned. The planning is beginning now. It's the sorts of things we're starting to think about and work out how to solve. So the fifth question is, what changes caused by COVID are going to continue post-COVID? I do not know. I mean, one example I think that springs to mind is we've pivoted to a completely online teaching model for an entire year with no notice. No notice, no warning, we just did it. It was brutal and it was a lot of work. And anyone who's been involved in it knows how much work that is. It's not a straightforward thing to do. But we now know that we can deliver teaching in an online environment, and it can be more effective than we perhaps thought it might be. I, for one, really like the in-person teaching. I like getting to talk to all of the students. And that was what I really liked about my first year workshops this year, but it's not been as big a difference online as I thought. And so I think that gives us some flexibility in how we might work out the best way to use the time that we have with people, with our students, to ensure that they're getting the information they need, and we're not just standing and delivering when they could read that bit and we could be doing more active type things. So I think we've learned a lot about what is possible, and it's going to be interesting to see how we reflect on that when we have the opportunity and what carries on. But broadly, I really don't know. I mean, it's going to depend on how long the pandemic lasts and how long the budgetary impact lasts. Those are things that my crystal ball has given up the ghost and run away. Okay. 6 is the university's plan for the roadmap out of lockdown and returning to campus. So including the return of students and the return of staff. So there's been a fair bit of movement so I'll start with the students. There's been a fair bit of movement in the information that's come out about the return of students to campus. I don't know the level of certainty that is around all of that. It's all happened very recently, and I've been on Zoom a lot. But it seems like I don't think we'll have undergraduate students back this year. 2021 is going to be all online for undergraduates. Honours is a question that is being addressed. I don't know if we've got the concrete answer yet, but the Vice-Chancellor is in contact with the Minister about that particular issue. So that one's being dealt with or being addressed at the highest level that we have access to. So it's the Vice-Chancellor and the Minister trying to resolve that. Postgraduates returning to campus is going to depend on, so postgraduates and staff are going to fall into a similar category for this. So those who undertake laboratory-based research, their return to campus is already happening under sort of social distancing and the PPE requirements that are necessary and all of those sorts of things. The return of students who are desktop-based and staff who are desktop-based is going to be guided by the government. It will have to be guided by the government, and it's probably going to be related to when the government position on if you can work at home, you must, becomes if you can work at home, you should, and then becomes everyone can just go back to work. The university is taking, and I think it's rightly taking, a quite an appropriate response to that, and that if, as long as the advice is if you can work from home, you should, there will be the expectation that we do. And I think that's the right thing to do from a public health perspective. It's probably the right thing to do from the continuity of research, because we don't want the risk of like a person being on campus when they didn't have to and bringing COVID with them and then spreading that around and causing us to have to close down facilities, because that has other impacts. There are then, of course, the impacts of people being at home. This has been a very difficult time in terms of social contact, and the government is starting to recognise that by allowing the sort of friends bubble in addition to the intimate partner bubble. But I suspect that most of the decisions that will be taken will be guided. Well, the decisions that are taken will be bound by the government rules, and I don't expect the university to run in front of that. And my personal view is that I don't think they should as well. I think we have a responsibility as leaders in the community to be doing the right thing. But there are other challenges, and we'll come to those a little bit later on, about people working at home and the situations they have at home and the challenges that presents them. What we were starting to think about prior to stage 4 is how we might provide people access to campus if they, where it might be beneficial, but where it wasn't essential because they were desktop based, and those conversations all stopped when the government rules changed. And so any information that comes out of that will be following this roadmap, which we're all sort of catching up with as we work through the budget. Okay, so question 7 was, is the faculty keeping track of the number of ECRs that have been lost or will be lost through contract expiry since March and over the next year? Is there data on how many ECR FTEs have disappeared and how many have been created and renewed? The answer, the follow-up is that I can't help but think that there are a number of ECR jobs turning over that don't get captured in the official university redundancies. So the answer to this is yes. So now that I'm transitioning into the head of school role, I know that there's a list. There's a discussion around every contract renewal, and there is that data is being collected and collated, not just for a data collection exercise, but is being collected and collated because every person is discussed at some depth and a record of that conversation is kept. So I wasn't part of those conversations that have happened to this point, but I do now have access to the record of each of them in the School of Biological Sciences. And the same thing will be playing out across all of the other schools. So we do know every contract that has not been renewed. We know every contract that has started. And you can get a sense, I don't have the numbers available for Monash, but you can get a sense of the potential scale of that by having a look at what the different numbers of redundancies across different universities are. So we're at the high 200s, other universities are into the 400s. Our MIT in the last couple of days put a number out which was around 1,000. And part of that was because they counted differently. They didn't just count ongoing, they counted contract non-renewals. I don't think the number at Monash is on that scale, but there are definitely potentially significant numbers. So I can't give you the numbers, but I can tell you that the answer of how the workforce is changed is known absolutely. Question 8 was a specific question made with regards to a DP19 funded postdoc and visa issues. That, unfortunately, that falls under the category of one that I don't know enough about to answer, but it also falls on the list of those where changes, where, I'm going to choose my words, where the external influence of the government on the things that we would like to do has been severe. So the job keeper fiasco, the multiple changes to those rules to exclude universities from it, the mooted changes to how funding of degrees is going to take place, and things like the visa changes have had a very significant impact on universities and have put some pretty severe constraints in the way of what we can do. And so I guess all I can say is that we are aware of those, and that's another one of those sorts of discussions that happens at the higher levels where, excuse me, our senior leadership lobby around where they lobby the consequences of those changes and the impact that they have on our university and others in order to get them into a more sensible place. But it is one where we're stuck with the government requirements. Okay, so there are a number of, beyond that, there are a number of questions that are a little bit more difficult for me to answer, but I am going to try and work through them all. And some of them are a little bit more troubling in tone, and that's why I want to address them as best I can here rather than just kick them down the road. So the first one is that some ECRs are going on okay, but many are really struggling due to a lack of genuine support from the school and the faculty. We really need to encourage genuine support and communication from the faculty and school leadership. So I definitely don't disagree with that sentiment. There's a bit of a challenge around what the genuine support is and what can actually be achieved. The communication has been an ongoing problem, and having been in the middle of a bunch of that communication, I guess all I can offer is an explanation, which might be viewed as an excuse. And it's up to you to decide how you take that. The challenge has been the changing landscape. So we've had information come through to us at faculty level, which we've passed on, which has then changed very quickly after we've passed it on. And so then we've moved to maybe a more conservative thing where information comes, we make sure it's correct before we pass it on, but that all adds time. And so a really significant challenge in the communication has been making sure that a plan is the plan that will be stuck to before that plan is rolled out. And the changing landscape has been extremely difficult. What I hope going forward is that because we are now moving to planning 2021, we can communicate a bit better about what 2021 will be like, and hopefully it will be more stable. And if it's more stable, then we can have more clear plans and more forward-looking plans, and then they can be communicated effectively. In terms of genuine support, so I would like the communication to be better, and we are trying to make it as good as we can, but it's hard because things change so fast. But they are stabilising now, and the average case numbers are coming down, and we have a plan at government, and so we can work through that. In terms of the genuine support, we're certainly open, and you can do it through Margaret or through me directly if you would prefer. Advice about what would be good, what would be valuable, what we could do. Unfortunately, I suspect that many of the things that we would like to do is going to be difficult. The contract, so for example, extending everyone's contract to cope with this is not financially possible. And then there are some other things that are raised later, which also offer constraints between who we support. And it's difficult to deal with that in a completely desirable way. So there are some challenges that we can't overcome or that we're trying to overcome, but the solution is non-optimal in that it will have negative impacts on people. So those ones are difficult, but if there are things that we can do, or you think that we can do, or you think that we should be doing, you can pass them on anonymously through Margaret, and they will definitely come. So Margaret passes everything on to me, and I talk to the Dean. So we do have that flow through. Whether or not we can do anything about it is always going to be the question, because there are multiple competing challenges to be balancing off. Okay, Monash's policy. So it's question 2 was Monash's policy discriminates directly against ECRs and places the burden of budget cuts squarely on those who can least afford it and have no access to other measures such as JobKeeper. So all I can say at this one is that no one wants to be shedding anyone's job. From what I've seen at Monash, this has not been a plan to sweep people out. I've seen speculation today that other universities are doing that. I don't think it's been Monash's plan. And my view on that is that if that was Monash's plan, this was not the plan that they would have executed. The problem with the burden of budget cuts is that they have sort of a cascading set of effects. So Monash voted for the job protection framework. They did that with a deferral of pay rises, a deferral of increments, a deferral of salary increases associated with promotion. There were no discretionary payments. The senior leadership took a 20% pay cut. So all of that took place, but we've seen that at other universities where they've put the framework forward with asking staff to take a pay cut, they've turned it down, and then the number of FTE that have been lost has been higher. And so getting back to a point where some impact was made constrained how much money was flowing around. And the university's cascade of obligations is to see through the contracts that they have in place. So for continuing staff, that means continuing contracts. For staff on contract, it means fulfilling that contract. So there are no contract staff being terminated. There are some possibilities under the VSPs for people who've been on contracts for long times, but you should go and look at those details. And so the university has been working hard to meet its obligations to people on contracts. But the way that things have been enacted means that the total pool of funding that's available to, or total pool of money that's available to renew contracts is not as big as it has been in previous years, particularly because we still had that teaching effort and we had a very, very substantial fall in revenue. So I'm hoping that as we go forward, it will be possible for research-related positions to be on a much more normal footing than they were this year. There are no commitments that can be made about that because the budgetary process hasn't been finalised, but I'm hoping that at least research will proceed as more normal next year than this year, because we have more time to plan for what the teaching effort and the costs thereof will be. Sort of following on from that, it's that social mix, but these other Q&A events do not address the main underlying issues, and the main underlying issues are not stated there, but I'm going to guess they are job security and things like that. And so a big part of the problem there has been the constantly changing feast and the fact that people are being held in uncertain positions much longer than any of us would like. So I do hope that as we sort out the budget and resolve what it will be for next year, those sorts of uncertainties will be lifted. The next question is about mental health. So the mental health of ECRs is suffering, and schools and the faculty need to do everything we can. And so my very first and most important suggestion I would make here is that I am not a mental health professional. So if people are aware of people who are having a difficult time, absolutely refer them to someone who is appropriately trained to provide that support. The University Counselling Service is actually very good. I've been to them. They do good work. So if you are aware of people who are in a difficult situation, do try and refer them to some kind of help. And at the lower level than that, it's important to stay in touch with each other as best we can and to recognise that this is a challenging time for everyone, and that we provide support and we do look out for people and encourage them towards support if they need it. I appreciate that these issues will be relieved by resolving some of the major structural problems that we have around job security and all of that stuff. That's a longer term challenge that I hope the university will meet adequately. But in the short term, it's really about looking out for each other, and hopefully as the lockdown eases, that will become better. I think we'll all be happy to see the end of the lockdown and be able to interact with people in a more normal way. Okay, the next question is one direct contribution that the school and faculty is change its policy from cutting funds to teaching and marking income for ECRs, especially PhD students, to making cuts in other areas such as salaries of senior staff. So this highlights two challenges. The first is that the sort of envelope of funding that was available this year was much smaller than the university expected. And the two challenges that we've had has been making sure that we deliver our teaching and trying to ensure the stability of the workforce as best we can. And unfortunately, funds going to PhD students to do marking for teaching directly draws money out of the pot for, because it's a single pot. that may be used to renew contracts for other people. So there is an absolute constraint there in terms of how much is available. And the reason the universities work so hard to find non-salary savings through this year and going forward is to alleviate that pressure. So that is an absolute constraint at present. The cuts in areas such as salaries of senior staff, I can say two things about that. One is that the university's enterprise bargaining agreement provides very strong protections for staff. So the university cannot cut staff salaries without the agreements that we had through the job protection framework. And the approach that this university took was to propose the deferment of some things so that there was an increased chance that the framework would be adopted. Other universities that tried asking staff to make salary cuts, the staff did not make them. The exception to that is it depends on exactly what is meant here by senior staff. So the Vice-Chancellor's group took a 20% pay cut. And then when I provided a list of the types of things that were adopted as part of the jobs protection framework, that included sort of, the phrase is discretionary allowances and things like that. And that is part of the remuneration packages of people at my level and head of school and the dean and above. So people at my level and above did take a pay cut through that mechanism. And that's how it happened. The problem is that there are not that many of us, and us taking a pay cut doesn't make that big a difference. Even the Vice-Chancellor's hefty salary taking a pay cut doesn't make that big a difference when the 370 million is the problem. So there were pay cuts taken by staff at sort of dean head levels and above because of the nature of how contracts work at those levels. But it's potential, there is the potential that more could have been done, but the risk was that the jobs protection framework would then not be adopted and the number of redundancies would have been greater. So the university, they took a path that worked. It was adopted. And then finally, ECRs are in a difficult position as they can't advocate for themselves. I think I would, well, depends on, again, how you mean advocate for themselves. Each of us have limited capacities to advocate for ourselves, but we all have people above us that can advocate on our behalf, and that chain works up. So within the schools, there are the ECR reps. The ECR reps can advocate to Margaret. Margaret can advocate to me. I can advocate to the dean. The dean can advocate to the provost to the Vice-Chancellor. So ECRs can't pick up the phone and talk to the Vice-Chancellor, but there are pathways through which that information flows, and all I can do is assure you that the information does get passed on. We are still, well, we will stop meeting so regularly for the next 2 weeks because it's mid-semester break and everyone is being encouraged to take a rest, but I do still meet with the dean twice a week to talk about issues that come up through the schools. And Margaret knows that she can reach out to me if she ever needs to. And as I've said multiple times, you can all reach out to me directly if you would like to. So that option is always available. And so that was the set of questions. I mean, I do apologize if I have not been able to answer them to your satisfaction, but it is the best set of information that I have at the moment. And if anyone wants to ask follow-ups, I've seen Margaret typing away, so I assume that's some are coming. Please do so.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Definitely a difficult set of questions to work through this time. And as you said, you know, if there is anyone who is struggling, if you are struggling, or if you know anyone who is struggling, please do use the support services that are available through the university and the Employee Assistance Program. As Craig mentioned, you know, they're really good, they're professional, they're there to support us. And this is a hard time and lots of us are struggling. So please do use that.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. So for what it's worth, when I went to see them, I went without an appointment and I spoke to the triage nurse. Mm-hmm. It's good. If you need to, it's worthwhile.
Yeah. And I presume that's all being done virtually now.
I would assume so.
Actually contacted them myself, so I don't know, but it is there and it's readily available. So please do use that. We don't want anyone sitting at home by themselves struggling. And as Craig said, also you can reach out to me. I'm happy to try and direct you on as best as possible, or pass information through to Craig if it's something that needs to be elevated up through the university as well. There were also several questions that came through, and I'll get to those in just a second. You mentioned quite a few times throughout that, Craig, that the budget for next year is currently being worked on, and it sounds like a lot of the answers that we're all sort of looking for depend on that budget somewhat. Do you have any idea of when that might be finalised, and we might be able to get some of those answers?
I guess the short answer is no. I know the timeline of the things that we're working through within the schools and the faculty. There is a central process which sets the overall envelope for the targets that we'll be needing to meet. And I don't know what the timeline is. And as far as I'm aware, no one does. I don't believe the Dean knows yet.
Okay.
Or if the Dean knows, he's not allowed to tell people at my lowly level.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, we'll continue to have these sessions. The monthly basis seems to be working well. So as that information becomes available, I'm sure we can find out those answers to those questions. Just also, thank you, Grant, for posting in the chat the link to the Employee Assistance Program. So have a look at that if you need it. Couple of questions. One is about DECRA support. So apparently an email just went out that whole support in PhD scholarships for DECRA applicants was cancelled. Just wondering if you can comment on that, Craig.
I didn't get that, so I assume it's in one of the schools, not necessarily all of them.
Okay. Would that be a school?
So it might be a school-specific thing, but it might just be that the other schools have not broadcast anything. So what? Okay. The contributions that are sometimes made to DECRA packages, which are PhD students. So it doesn't seem, from the information that we've been able to gather across Success, it doesn't seem like they make that much of a difference to the outcome, if anything at all. But also there's always, and this is certainly within biological sciences, I'm not sure about the other schools, anyone who would receive a PhD stipend via the contribution to a DECRA would still have to be successful within the requirements of a specific school anyway, because it's not just a free-for-all that can be passed to any particular person walking by. And so it will make a difference to what is written down on the application, but it seems to me that it's unlikely to make it seems very unlikely to make a difference to the outcome, because the ARC and the assessors are wise to the fact that universities shouldn't be judged on just the amount of money that they pile into these things. And also it's unlikely to make an impact on whether or not that project could have a student associated with it, because the student could still apply through the standard scholarship process. And if they were of the quality that they'd need to be anyway, they would be likely competitive for one of the existing scholarships. So it's a way that universities have provided, have appeared to provide support to DECRAs when it's on paper it exists, but in reality it goes through the same process anyway. And so this is unlikely to make a difference. What it does make a difference to is that it's not committing large amounts of funds going forward. It's just putting those funds in the pool for everyone.
Yeah.
So I really don't think it affects outcomes from the data that I've had access to. And
yeah.
Part of my job has been trying to work out if that's the case, and I don't think it does.
Okay. Well, that's good. And hopefully that answers that question. There was another question also sort of around what we've been talking about around supporting ECRs. So we've sort of mentioned at previous sessions that there is some ECR budget and we're wanting to, run activities or events or whatever to support the ECR community and career development and professional development. This question was around whether whether there have been any suggestions about what to do, or whether anything has been decided around how to use this sort of ECR budget for support activities and things.
To me, no.
Yeah, that is the short answer here.
Yeah.
There have been no suggestions. So please send us suggestions if you have suggestions, because as we've said, you know, obviously this is a hard time for everyone, and we want to do everything that we can to support the ECR community through this, be it in career development or however else we can do that. So please send your suggestions to me or send them to Craig if you'd prefer to do that as well.
So I guess the slight follow on there is there has been one suggestion that we have looked into, but it didn't have budget implications.
Yes, is that the one around making courses available?
Yeah.
Is that something that we can speak about, or?
We don't. So the suggestion was making subjects available to ECRs that are being delivered across the university. We put that to the Associate Dean Education, who thought it was a good idea and was going to run it up the chain.
Yeah. So,
being looked into, I think, is the answer to that, but it doesn't affect the ECR budget because it would be not coming out of that.
Yeah. So that would be more of a professional development and training type of program or offering to ECRs. But if you do have any suggestions, please let us know, and we'd be happy to talk them through and see what we can organise to get up and running. There hasn't been anything come through on the chat in the last few minutes. I'm just having a look if I had anything else noted down. I think that's everything that I had written down that we've covered. Was there anything else that you wanted to just mention while you've got us all here, Craig? Or
I guess, yeah, it's going to sound like the company line, right? But no one wants jobs to be lost unnecessarily. We want to maintain the quality of the workforce that we've got. There's no benefit to the university for good people leaving unnecessarily, and so we are trying to do deal with this in the best way that we can. I would certainly like us to be in a position to provide more certainty going forward. I think as I become head of school, that's going to be part of the challenge I'm going to be facing. And so yeah, it is. We don't want to just shed everyone and not renew everyone's contracts and have them go away. Just doesn't. There's no benefit to it for anyone, including the university organisation monster, whatever it is.
Exactly. All right. Well, we have taken up nearly the full hour today. There's been a lot to discuss. So thank you again for
No worries.
the time for all of these sessions. We will continue to run them, so please do continue to come along and suggest anyone else to come along as well. We want everyone to have as much information about all of this as we can provide. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks all. Take care. Take care of each other.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Craig.
No worries.
That was a bit of a
That was a heavy